Imagine waking up at sea and realizing something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. The radio stops working. Your navigation equipment goes dark. You look at your charts and they're useless now. The sky is turning black. The waves aren't looking like waves anymore. They're looking like walls. You've got no way to call anyone. No one knows where you are. And you're 1,900 kilometers from the nearest land. That's where Tim Shaddock was on day 14 of his dream voyage across the Pacific Ocean. 51 years old, Australian, tattooed sailor with a wild beard and a love for the open water. He'd quit his job years earlier, left behind the corporate life, the stability, the predictable paychecks. He was chasing something that mattered to him: freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind you read about in books or watch in movies. The kind where you're completely alone with yourself and the vastness of nature. What he wasn't prepared for was how fast that dream could turn into a nightmare. But here's where it gets strange. He wasn't completely alone. Traveling with him was a dog named Bella, a stray he'd literally picked up off the street in Mexico just one day before he set sail. A dog that technically had no business being on that boat. A dog that would become the reason he didn't give up when everything inside him wanted to. This is the story of 90 days in open water. 90 days with nothing to eat except raw fish. 90 days with barely enough fresh water to drink. 90 days of storms, sharks, starvation, and the kind of psychological breakdown that comes when you truly understand you might never see land again. And somehow, against every odd, against every biological limit of human endurance, Tim Shaddock and his dog Bella survived. Let me take you back a few years, back to 2020. The whole world was losing its mind. COVID was shutting everything down. People were stuck in their homes, afraid to go outside, afraid to breathe near other people. Economies were collapsing. Mental health was crumbling. And for most people, the response was to buckle down and wait it out. Tim Shaddock wasn't most people. He was a successful guy, had a good job in Sydney, Australia. Decent salary, the kind of position that looks impressive on a resume. Normal life, normal routine. But somewhere deep down, he'd always felt like something was missing. He'd always been the type who felt trapped by normalcy. And when the world stopped, when everything came to a standstill, he made a decision that would terrify most people. He walked away from it all. He quit his job, packed up his life, and he flew to Mexico with one simple goal. He was going to build a boat, well, a catamaran, and sail across the Pacific Ocean. By himself, with no crew, no backup, no safety net. Just him and the water. It took him months to build that boat. The catamaran was called Aloha Toa. He was meticulous about it. This wasn't some impulse decision. This was a man who'd thought about this his entire life and finally decided to stop thinking and start doing. He bought supplies. He studied the weather patterns. He learned navigation. He prepared for the journey the way you'd expect a serious sailor to prepare, with respect, with attention to detail, with the understanding that the ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. By April 2023, after months of preparation, he was ready. He stood on the dock in La Paz, Mexico, looking at his boat. Behind him was the life he'd known. Ahead of him was 6,000 kilometers of open ocean. The plan was simple: sail east across the Pacific. Head toward French Polynesia. It should take him about a month. Maybe a month and a half if the weather wasn't cooperating. He had a route. He had supplies. He had a radio. He had GPS navigation. He had everything a sailor could want for a journey like this. What he didn't have yet was a crew member. Here's where fate steps in. The day before he was supposed to set sail, Tim was walking around the marina area, doing last-minute checks on his boat, making sure everything was secured and ready to go. And that's when he saw her. There was a dog, a stray. She was thin, hungry-looking, and clearly hadn't been cared for in a while. She was wandering around the docks, probably scavenging for scraps and leftover food from fishing boats. She was scared. She wasn't aggressive, just scared and uncertain, like she'd been living rough for too long. Most people would have walked past. Most people would have thought, "That's not my responsibility. That's someone else's problem." Tim wasn't most people. He called her over. She came cautiously, unsure if she could trust him. But something happened between them in that moment. He looked at her. She looked at him. And somehow they understood each other. Two beings who were both a little broken, both a little lost, both looking for something. He decided to take her with him. But here's the thing. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision with no thought behind it. Tim tried to find her a home. He really did. He asked around the marina. He asked local people if anyone knew who owned her or if anyone wanted to adopt her. But no one did. Nobody wanted to take on another stray dog. She was just another problem, another mouth to feed. And so, Tim made the decision. He was going to take her on the boat. This dog, this random stray he'd just met, was going to be his sailing companion across the Pacific Ocean. He named her Bella. The night before departure, he made sure she had food. He set up a space for her on the boat where she could feel safe. He was treating her like crew, because that's what she was now. He had no idea how long she'd been without proper care, but he could see she just needed someone to believe in her. In the morning, they untied the boat, Tim and Bella, the sailor and his rescue dog. No one in the marina thought much of it. It was just another boat leaving the marina, just another adventure beginning. If they'd known what was waiting for them out there, they probably would have tried to stop him. The first days were actually beautiful, not in a boring way, in a genuine, perfect conditions way. The weather was cooperative. The wind was steady, but not harsh. The ocean was showing off, those perfect blue waters you see in travel magazines, the kind that make you understand why sailors fall in love with the sea in the first place. Tim was in his element. He was doing exactly what he dreamed about doing. He was out there, free, with nothing but his own skills keeping him alive. And Bella, after those initial uncertain hours, started to adapt. She got used to the motion of the boat. She got used to the salt spray. She learned where to position herself to stay safe when the waves picked up. Tim was meticulous about the daily routine. He'd wake up early, check the weather, check the instruments, adjust the sails if needed. He'd fish for his meals, fresh tuna that he'd cook or sometimes eat raw. He'd make sure Bella had water and food. They'd developed a little rhythm together, this unlikely pair. A 51-year-old sailor and a stray dog from Mexico sailing into the open ocean. The thing about the early days at sea, though, is that they give you a false sense of security. The ocean is deceptive that way. When it's calm, you start to think it's always going to be calm. You start to feel like you've got this, like you understand the ocean, like you're in control. You're never in control. Tim had read the weather reports before leaving. He knew that there were storms in this part of the Pacific during this time of year. He understood intellectually that a storm could hit. But there's a difference between knowing something intellectually and actually experiencing it. There's a difference between reading about a hurricane in a weather report and actually having one bear down on you while you're in a boat in the middle of nowhere. Day 13 came and went without incident. Day 14 started normally enough. Tim woke up. He checked his instruments. Everything looked fine. He and Bella had breakfast, some of the supplies he'd brought, some fresh fish he'd caught the previous day. But then something changed. Around midday on day 14, Tim noticed something. The barometer was dropping. Not gradually, dropping. The pressure reading was becoming alarming. The wind, which had been steady and predictable, started to shift. It wasn't just changing direction. It was becoming erratic. One moment, it was pushing the boat from the left. The next moment, it was trying to push it from the right. He'd studied enough weather to recognize what this meant. Something big was building. Something serious was coming. Tim wasn't naive. He wasn't the type of sailor who ignored warning signs. He immediately started preparing. He secured anything that could move. He checked all the lines. He made sure the sails were positioned correctly for what was coming. He brought Bella into the cabin and made sure she was in the safest spot possible. and then he waited. It was an eerie kind of waiting. The sky was still mostly clear. That's one of the terrifying things about storms on the open ocean. They can be completely invisible until they're right on top of you. You can be in relatively calm conditions, and then suddenly, within hours, you're in hell. The waves started to build, slowly at first, then faster. What had been gentle, rolling swells became chop. The chop became bigger waves. The waves became serious waves. And the wind just kept getting stronger. Tim was at the helm now, completely focused. He was making calculations. Wind speed, wave height, the direction of the storm, how much sail he had up, what direction the boat needed to point. Every decision mattered. One wrong move could capsize the boat. One miscalculation could tear the sails to shreds. Bella was scared. Dogs sense these things. They feel the energy shift. They understand when something dangerous is approaching. She stayed in her spot below deck, but she was whimpering. She was looking at Tim, trying to understand what was happening. And then, around late afternoon on day 14, it hit. A storm at sea doesn't gradually increase. There's a threshold, and you cross it. One moment, you're in bad conditions. The next moment, you're in a situation where your life depends on every single thing you do in the next few minutes. The waves stopped being waves and started being walls of water. Tim could see them coming from 100 meters away, massive, dark, terrifying. The boat would rise up as one approached, climb what felt like a mountain of churning water, reach the crest, and then drop down the other side as if someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. The wind was screaming now. Not metaphorically, it was literally screaming. Tim had to hold onto the wheel with all his strength. The rain came sideways, so hard it felt like needles hitting his face. The visibility dropped to almost nothing. He could barely see the bow of his own boat. And then came the moment that changed everything. A wave, bigger than the others, with this strange, almost intelligent-looking crest, hit from an angle he wasn't quite expecting. It caught the boat wrong. The boat lurched. The mainsail started to tear. Not gradually. It ripped. The sound was catastrophic. The sound of fabric being shredded by forces that don't care about your plans. But that was just the beginning of the damage. The electrical system, the storm, the intensity of the lightning and the chaos, the way the boat was being thrown around. Something went wrong with the power systems. And when I say something went wrong, I mean everything electrical on the boat stopped working. The radio went dead. The GPS navigation system that had been guiding him for 2 weeks simply stopped functioning. The navigation computer that had all his routes and calculations went dark. Tim didn't realize the full extent of what had happened until the chaos started to subside about an hour later. The storm moved on as suddenly as it had arrived, which is typical of these kinds of systems. They come in fast, they break things, they leave, and then you're left to assess the damage. He realized he was alive. Bella was alive. The boat was still floating. But his ability to navigate, his ability to communicate, his ability to contact anyone for help, all of it was gone. He was now in open water, 1,900 kilometers from the nearest land, with no way to tell anyone where he was, with no navigation equipment to guide him toward land, with no radio to call for help, with just his sailing knowledge, his survival instincts, and a dog who was looking at him with fear in her eyes. For the first few hours after the storm passed, Tim was in a kind of shock. His hands were still gripping the wheel. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The adrenaline that had been keeping him functioning during the chaos was starting to wear off, and that's when the reality of the situation began to set in. He made his way below deck to check on Bella. She was soaking wet, shaking with fear, but alive. He held her for a moment, both of them trying to process what had just happened. Then he started the grim task of assessing the damage. The radio, completely dead. He tried turning it on, cycling through the frequencies. Nothing but static. The GPS system, same story. Gone. The navigation computer, unresponsive. He had a backup radio, a handheld VHF, tucked away in one of the cabins. He took it out with a glimmer of hope. Maybe this one survived. He pressed the button to transmit. He called out on the standard emergency frequency. Nothing came back. He tried again, and again. The radio just seemed to swallow his voice and give nothing in return. It was like screaming into the void. That's when something shifted inside him. He wasn't panicking. Tim wasn't the type to panic, but he was understanding, with absolute clarity, that help wasn't coming. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody was going to stumble upon him. Nobody was going to hear a distress call. He was going to have to get himself out of this situation, him and Bella. That was it. He went above deck and looked around. The mast was intact. Thank God for that. The boat wasn't taking on water. The damage was real. The sail was torn. The electronics were completely fried. And he had some structural concerns from the way the boat had been thrown around. But it was still floating. It was still his best chance. The barometer had already started rising. The storm system was moving away. The wind was dropping. Within a few hours, it was almost calm again, which was surreal. The ocean had thrown a tantrum, and now it was pretending nothing had happened. The sky was clearing. The stars started appearing as the sun set. Tim sat on the deck and let himself feel the weight of what had happened. He was adrift in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with no way to navigate, no way to communicate. His GPS could have told him his exact location down to a few meters. His radio could have called for help. His navigation computer could have told him which direction to go. Without them, he had nothing but his eyes, his sailing knowledge, and the sun and stars. He thought about turning back, trying to sail back to Mexico. But he didn't know exactly how far he'd drifted during the storm. He didn't know his exact position. Trying to navigate back blindly in a damaged boat seemed like a recipe for disaster. He had two options, really. He could try to limp back toward land using celestial navigation, using the sun and stars like sailors had done for thousands of years before GPS existed. Or he could continue forward toward French Polynesia, which was probably closer at this point anyway. He made the decision to continue forward. If the wind held, if he could figure out how to patch the sail, if he could navigate by the sun and stars, he might be able to reach land. It was a long shot, but it was a better shot than trying to sail back. That first night after the storm was rough. Not because of the weather had calmed down. It was rough because of the silence. Without the radio, without the electronic hum of the GPS and the navigation systems, there was just the sound of the water and the wind. For a man who'd been relying on technology to keep him connected to the world, the silence was deafening. He went to bed with Bella curled up next to him. He tried to sleep, but he kept thinking about what would happen if another storm hit. What would happen if he got sick? What would happen if the boat took on serious damage? The mind does funny things when you're alone at sea. It starts playing out all the worst-case scenarios. It starts doing calculations about survival and rescue. It starts wondering if anyone would ever know what happened to you. Around day 20, Tim realized they were starting to run low on fresh water. He'd prepared for the journey with enough water to last for 2 months if he was rationing carefully. But the storm had damaged one of his water tanks. He wasn't sure exactly how much he'd lost, but it was significant. Suddenly, what he thought was a comfortable supply was starting to feel precarious. He began implementing strict water rationing. For himself, he was maybe drinking half a liter a day. For Bella, he was doing the same calculation on a smaller scale. This wasn't enough water to feel comfortable, but it was enough to survive. He started spending more time looking at the sky, hoping for rain. Rain meant fresh water. Rain meant life. He'd brought fishing equipment with him, and thankfully, that survived the storm intact. On day 22, he managed to hook his first fish, a decent-sized tuna. He didn't have a working stove anymore. The electrical systems that powered it were dead. but he could eat it raw. He'd learned enough about fishing to know that raw fish, if it was fresh enough, was safe to eat. It didn't taste great. It was tough and sometimes a bit fishy in a way that made him gag. But it was protein. It was calories. And crucially, it had some moisture in it. He and Bella ate together. He divided the fish carefully. Bella got a portion. He got a portion. It was something they both understood. They were in this together, and whatever resources they had, they were going to share them. That was the deal. Around day 25, he had his first real crisis with the water situation. There had been no rain for several days. His daily ration, which was already minimal, was starting to represent a serious depleted supply. He was drinking just enough to keep from becoming dehydrated, but not enough to feel anything close to refreshed. His lips were starting to get dry. His mouth felt thick. He could feel the early stages of dehydration starting to affect his thinking. Bella was in worse shape. Dogs need more water than humans when it's hot, and the tropical sun out here was relentless. She was panting constantly. She wasn't eating much of the fish he offered her. She just wanted water. She kept looking at him with this expression that said, "Please, I need water." And Tim was rationing what they had, trying to make it last, trying to figure out how to get more. The psychological weight of this was starting to hit him harder than the physical challenges. It's one thing to be uncomfortable. It's another thing to be watching your companion suffer and to feel like you might not be able to help her. There was a point where Tim sat on the deck. Day 26 or 27, he was losing track, and he actually considered the possibility that they might not make it. He was thinking about how long a person could survive without water. 3 days, maybe 4 if you're lucky. He had maybe 3 days of water left, and that was being extremely generous with the rationing. Bella probably had less. And the weather forecast, what little he could predict from looking at the sky and understanding weather patterns, suggested no rain for at least another few days. That's when something shifted. Tim had always been the kind of person who dealt with problems practically. He didn't sit around feeling sorry for himself. He looked at the problem and he looked for solutions. So instead of sitting there catastrophizing about running out of water, he decided to do something about it. He set up every container he had on the deck. He had various buckets, bottles, cans, anything that could hold liquid. He set them all out. He knew rain was coming eventually. When it came, he was going to catch as much as he possibly could. In the meantime, he was going to continue his strict rationing. He was going to accept the discomfort. He was going to take it one day at a time. The next day, day 28, the clouds started building on the horizon. Real clouds, not just the wispy kind you see most days. These were the kind of clouds that meant weather was coming. Tim had never been so happy to see dark clouds in his entire life. He made sure Bella had water, what little he could give her. He made sure the boat was secure. And then he waited. The rain started in the late afternoon. It wasn't a huge storm like the one that had destroyed his equipment. It was just a proper rainstorm. And Tim, for the first time in days, felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was out on deck, collecting the rainwater in every container he could find. Bella was inside, sheltered from the downpour, and Tim was literally catching water from the sky, understanding with complete clarity how precious, how absolutely life-saving this simple rain was. By the time the rain stopped, about 45 minutes later, he had collected maybe 20 liters of fresh water. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to ease the immediate crisis. It meant he could increase his rations. It meant Bella would have enough to drink. It meant he could breathe for a few more days at least. That night, Tim sat with Bella and told her what had happened. He didn't expect her to understand the words, but she understood the tone. He was calm again. The crisis had passed. They were still alive. They had water. They had food. They were making it one day at a time. By day 30, Tim had developed a routine. He would wake up at dawn. He would check the boat for any damage or issues that needed addressing. He would check the rigging. He would attempt to keep the sail in the best configuration possible for whatever wind was available. He would fish for meals. He would collect water when it rained. He would spend time with Bella. And he would try to navigate using dead reckoning and celestial navigation, using the sun's position and the stars to figure out where he was and where he needed to go. It was an incredibly basic way to navigate. It was the way sailors had done it for centuries before GPS. But Tim had studied it. He knew how to do it. It wasn't precise, but it gave him a general sense of direction. It gave him hope that he was generally heading toward land rather than away from it. By the end of the first month at sea, day 30, Tim had begun to accept his new reality. He was adrift in the Pacific Ocean. He had no way to communicate with anyone. He didn't know exactly where he was. He didn't know when he would reach land, if he would reach land. But he was still alive. Bella was still alive. The boat was still floating. And as long as those three things were true, he could keep going. He looked at Bella one evening, sitting on the deck as the sun was setting, turning the ocean orange and pink. She was looking out at the horizon with him. She was skinny. She was weathered by the salt spray. Her fur was matted and bleached by the sun. But she was still there, still his companion, still the reason he wasn't completely alone out here in this endless expanse of water. He scratched behind her ears and said something that would become his mantra for the next 2 months. "We're going to make it, girl. Somehow, we're going to make it." Neither of them knew how true that would be. Neither of them knew what still lay ahead. The second month would bring challenges Tim hadn't even imagined yet. Challenges that would test not just his body, but his mind, his will to keep going, his humanity. But for now, on day 30, they had survived the first month. They had water, they had food, they had each other. And sometimes, when you're out in the middle of the ocean with absolutely nothing, that's enough. Day 35 started like any other day. Tim woke up. He checked the boat. The weather was decent. A light breeze, manageable waves, the kind of morning that almost felt peaceful if you could forget you were stranded in the middle of an ocean. He and Bella had their breakfast. He'd caught a fish the day before, and they split it. Water rations were okay. Things were relatively stable. He decided to go fishing. His fishing line was one of his most valuable possessions at this point. It represented food. It represented survival. He had hooks, weights, and some lures that he'd brought specifically for this kind of fishing. The water was relatively calm, so the conditions were decent for it. He was standing on the edge of the boat, line in hand, when he noticed something. At first, he thought it was just a shadow in the water. But then it moved, and then it came closer. And then Tim realized what he was looking at. There was a shark, not a small one. Not some harmless reef shark that you might see in shallow tropical waters. This was a tiger shark, maybe 3 meters long, maybe a bit longer. Tim could see the distinctive stripes, even from above the water. He could see the size of it. He could see the way it was circling, and he understood, with a jolt of adrenaline that was almost as intense as the storm, that this shark was interested in him. More specifically, it was interested in the fish he was catching. Tim had actually caught a fish just minutes before the shark showed up. It was flopping on the line, trying to escape. The shark had apparently seen the commotion in the water and come to investigate. Now it was circling closer. Sharks have this way of moving that's both graceful and terrifying. They glide through the water with purpose. This one seemed to have decided that there was food here, and it was going to get it. Tim's immediate instinct was to pull the line in, get the fish up and out of the water, get the bleeding fish away from the shark before things escalated. But his hands were shaking. Whether it was adrenaline or just the shock of seeing something that large and predatory this close to the boat, he wasn't sure. He started reeling the line in, hand over hand, moving as fast as he could. The shark came closer. It wasn't attacking. Not yet. It was investigating. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth that looked like they could tear through metal. The fish on Tim's line thrashed harder, sensing the predator, trying desperately to escape. Tim was pulling faster now, muscles burning, pulling with everything he had. The shark moved in with shocking speed. For a moment, Tim thought it was going to grab the fish right off his line. The water churned. There was a flash of movement. And then suddenly, the fish was gone. Not because Tim had pulled it out of the water, but because the shark had bitten it clean off the line. Tim stumbled backward. Bella barked from inside the cabin. The shark stayed there for a moment, suspended in the water below the boat, looking up at Tim almost like it was surprised the fish had disappeared. Then it made a wide circle and disappeared into the deeper water. For several minutes after that, Tim just stood there. His heart was pounding. His hands were still shaking. He looked down at his fishing line, at the severed end where the fish had been moments ago. He thought about what would have happened if he'd been in the water. He thought about all the times he'd considered jumping in just to rinse off, to feel something other than the constant salt and stickiness of ocean life. That shark encounter changed something in Tim's mind. It was a reminder that he wasn't just dealing with the ocean as an abstract force. He was sharing this space with creatures that could kill him in seconds. Creatures that didn't care about his plans or his dreams, or the fact that he was trying to survive. To the shark, he was either food or an obstacle. Nothing more. He went inside and sat with Bella. He didn't talk to her out loud. He wasn't at that point yet. But he held her, and she pressed her head against his chest, and they just sat there together for a while. Two creatures who'd found each other in chaos, clinging to each other in a world that didn't particularly care if they lived or died. By day 40, Tim was starting to feel the cumulative effects of everything he'd been through. His body was changing. He'd lost a significant amount of weight. His ribs were starting to show prominently. His face had hollowed out. The beard he'd had when he left port was now thicker and wilder, bleached almost white by the sun. His skin was burned and peeling and burned again. But the physical changes were almost nothing compared to what was happening in his mind. Isolation at sea is different from isolation on land. If you're isolated on land, there are still trees, animals, maybe the sound of wind or water. There's still a sense of being part of the world. Out here, there was nothing. Just endless water in every direction. Just the boat. Just Bella. Just Tim. And the silence was becoming louder every single day. He started doing things to cope with the boredom and the psychological weight. He talked to Bella constantly. He didn't expect her to understand the words, but he told her everything. He told her about his life before the ocean. He told her about the job he quit. He told her about the reasons why he needed to be out here. He told her his fears and his hopes and everything in between. He made up voices for Bella. He would ask her questions and then answer them in a high-pitched dog voice that sounded nothing like a real dog, but somehow made him feel less alone. He was aware enough to know that this was a sign that he was starting to lose his grip on reality. But he did it anyway, because the alternative, complete silence, complete solitude, was worse. He started keeping a video diary. He had a camera on the boat, one that had somehow survived the storm. He would film himself talking to the camera. He wanted there to be a record of what was happening. He wanted someone to know his story, even if nobody ever found the camera and saw what he'd filmed. It was like writing a message in a bottle, except the bottle was a digital file that would probably never be seen by anyone. On day 43, something shifted. Tim woke up and felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Despair. Complete, overwhelming despair. It wasn't the immediate panic of the storm or the acute fear of the shark encounter. It was something deeper and darker. It was the understanding that he could be out here for months, that he might not make it, that Bella might not make it, that nobody knew where they were or what had happened to them. He lay in bed, the bunk below deck where he slept, and he just cried. Not little tears, but actual body-shaking sobs. The kind of crying where you can't breathe properly and your whole body is just overwhelmed with emotion. He cried because he was scared. He cried because he was tired. He cried because he missed solid ground. He cried because Bella was suffering, and it was his fault. He cried because sometimes the weight of everything is just too much to carry. Bella came and put her head on his chest. She didn't understand what was happening, but she understood that Tim was upset. Dogs sense these things. She stayed there with him while he cried, not moving, just providing her presence. And eventually, he stopped crying. His body simply ran out of tears. He was exhausted. He was emotionally empty. But Bella was still there. The boat was still floating. The sun was still rising and setting. Life was still continuing, whether he was falling apart or not. That day became a kind of turning point. Tim realized something important. He couldn't afford to fall apart. Not completely. Bella was depending on him. The boat was depending on him. And if he lost his mind, if he gave up mentally, then physically he would start making mistakes. He would get sloppy about safety. He would stop fishing because he wouldn't see the point. He would stop maintaining the boat. And that's when things would really get bad. So he made a decision. He was going to find a way to be okay with this. Not happy. He wasn't going to pretend that being stranded at sea was anything other than awful. But he was going to accept it. He was going to embrace the routine. He was going to find meaning in the daily tasks. He was going to use the isolation as something to learn from, rather than something to be destroyed by. He started being more disciplined about his routine. He would wake up at dawn. He would do maintenance on the boat. He would check the rigging, check the hull, check everything that could potentially fail. He would fish for food. He would collect water. He would try to navigate based on the sun and stars. He would spend time with Bella. He would watch the sunset. He would sleep. And then he would do it all again the next day. It sounds simple, but it was actually profound. By creating structure, by giving himself tasks and purposes, he was creating a reason to keep going. Each day wasn't just another day of endless suffering. Each day was a day where he accomplished things. Each day was a day where he and Bella stayed alive. By day 50, his body had adapted in strange ways. He was thin, in a way that looked almost skeletal. But his body had stopped deteriorating so rapidly. He'd found a level of caloric intake, raw fish, and occasional seabirds that landed on the boat. That was keeping him alive, even if it wasn't keeping him well fed. His hands had developed calluses from handling the rope and the fishing line. His skin, beneath the burns and peeling, was becoming toughened to the sun. His mind had also adapted. He wasn't having the devastating emotional breakdowns he was having in the first month. He'd developed coping mechanisms. He had his routines. He had his conversations with Bella. He had his video diary. And he had hope. The kind of hope that's not based on any particular evidence that things will get better, but rather the simple refusal to give up. Then came day 60. Tim was on deck doing his morning routine when he saw something on the horizon. At first, he thought it was just an illusion. The heat can do that to you. It can make you see things that aren't there. But he kept watching, and the shape got clearer. It was a boat. An actual boat. Not another sailboat like his. This was a fishing vessel. A proper commercial fishing boat, with a hull and an engine and everything that came with being a real working boat. For a moment, Tim couldn't believe it. He looked at Bella. Did she see it? Yes. Her ears perked up. She seemed to sense the excitement in Tim's body. He grabbed everything he could find that would make noise or be visible. He had a flare gun on the boat. He'd made sure to keep it safe through the storm because it was his backup communication device. He fired it. A red flare shot into the sky. He was waving his arms. He was shouting, even though he knew it was pointless, even though there was no way they could hear him from this distance. The fishing boat was coming closer. Or was it? Tim was trying to judge the distance and the trajectory. It looked like it might pass close enough that they could see him. It looked like they were going to see the boat and investigate. He fired another flare. He kept waving, He could see the fishing boat more clearly now. It was definitely large. It was definitely a working vessel. It looked like a tuna fishing boat, the kind that might be working this part of the Pacific. But it wasn't changing course. It was moving across the horizon, but not toward him. It was going to pass by. It was going to miss him. Tim kept waving. He kept firing flares. He was practically jumping on the deck, trying to make himself visible. Bella was barking. The two of them were doing everything they could to get attention. The boat continued on its path. It was getting farther away now, not closer. Tim watched it with growing desperation. This was a real boat. These were real people. This was his chance to be rescued, and it was slipping away. He watched until the boat disappeared over the horizon. He watched until there was nothing but empty ocean again. And then he sat down on the deck and felt something break inside him. Not in an emotional way where he cried. He was past that, but in a deeper way. A way where hope died. A way where he understood that rescue wasn't coming. That nobody knew where he was. That the ocean was so vast and indifferent that even when a boat passed within miles of him, it didn't matter. He was invisible. Bella came and lay down next to him. She put her head on his thigh, and they sat there together, watching the sun move across the sky, neither of them moving. That night was harder than day 43. Because on day 43, Tim had been depressed about his situation. On day 60, Tim had been shown exactly how hopeless his situation might be. But by the next morning, something had shifted again. Tim realized that giving up was still not an option. Because even if nobody came to rescue him, even if he was truly alone out here, Bella was still looking at him with those eyes that said she believed in him. And he couldn't let her down. So he got up. He fished. He maintained the boat. He navigated by the sun and stars. He did all the things he'd been doing for the previous month. And he tried not to think about the fishing boat that had passed him by. He tried not to think about how easy it would have been for a different boat, with more alert crew, to see him and come help him. By day 70, Tim had been adrift for over 2 months. 2 months without another human being to talk to, face to face. 2 months of uncertainty. 2 months of surviving on a minimal diet. 2 months of physical and emotional strain that was beginning to show signs of catching up with him. His body was deteriorating in ways he hadn't really processed. His teeth were starting to feel loose in his gums, a sign of scurvy, a lack of vitamin C that he couldn't replace with what was available to him. His bones ached, his muscles were atrophied, he was losing hair, his immune system was compromised. If he got sick out here, if he developed an infection or a serious illness, there was no way to treat it beyond basic first aid. But he was still here. He was still alive. And day 70 meant he'd made it through the first part of the journey, the second month. 2 months survived on raw fish and rainwater and sheer determination. 2 months with Bella. 2 months proving that you could survive longer than most people thought was possible without proper food, without clean water, without medical care. And around day 75, the weather started to change again. The barometric pressure was dropping. The wind was increasing. The clouds on the horizon were starting to look dark and ominous. Tim recognized the signs. Another storm was coming. And unlike the first one, he was already exhausted. His body was already compromised. He was weaker now than he'd been when the first storm hit. This time, he wasn't going to get any lucky breaks. This time, his electronics were already destroyed. This time, there was no further to fall. This time, if the boat went down, he was going down with it. There was no worse scenario left. He'd already lived through the worst thing he could imagine. And yet, somehow, that was almost calming, because there was nothing left to lose. By day 78, the storm had arrived. It wasn't quite as intense as the first one, but it was still serious. The waves were significant. The wind was strong. The rain was coming sideways. And Tim, exhausted and thin and barely hanging on, was once again fighting to keep his boat from capsizing. Bella was below deck, scared but sheltered. Tim was up top, doing what needed to be done, working by instinct more than anything else, his body moving through the motions that had kept him alive for 3 months at sea. He wasn't thinking about rescue anymore. He wasn't thinking about getting off this boat. He wasn't thinking about anything beyond the immediate. Keep the boat upright, keep sailing, keep going. One wave at a time, one moment at a time, and somewhere in that storm, something inside Tim changed. He wasn't fighting to survive anymore. He was just surviving. It wasn't a goal. It wasn't a challenge. It was just what he was doing. It was just what he did now. He was a person who survived. He was a person who kept going. He was a person who didn't give up. And that simple acceptance, that understanding that this was just his life now, this was just what he was doing, somehow made it all bearable. By day 85, Tim had stopped counting the days so carefully. He knew roughly where he was in the calendar of this nightmare, roughly how much time had passed. But the numbers were becoming less important. What mattered was that each day he woke up, each day he fished, each day he and Bella were still alive. His body had reached a kind of equilibrium with starvation. He wasn't getting healthier, but he wasn't deteriorating at the catastrophic rate he had been in the early weeks. His body had adapted to the minimal calories. His metabolism had slowed. He was existing in a state that wasn't thriving, but it was surviving. It was holding. The psychological toll was harder to quantify. He'd been alone with his thoughts for nearly 3 months now. He'd worked through a lot of mental territory. He'd faced his fears. He'd made peace with the possibility that he might not make it. He'd accepted that Bella might not make it. And somehow, in accepting those things, he'd become calmer. Not happy, but calm. There was a difference. He was talking to Bella more than ever now. Extended conversations where he'd ask questions and answer them for her. He told her about his childhood. He told her about his family in Australia. He told her about why he'd felt the need to quit his job and do this crazy thing. He told her that if they didn't make it, he wanted her to know that she wasn't alone, that she mattered, that he was grateful she was here with him. It sounds crazy when you say it out loud. A grown man having full conversations with his dog about life and death. But out here, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with no other human to talk to, it made perfect sense. It was sanity. It was connection. It was the thing that kept him from completely losing his mind. By day 88, the wind had picked up from a different direction. It was pushing the boat in a way that felt different. Tim had been navigating by the sun and stars for so long that he understood intuitively what different wind patterns meant. This wind felt like it was coming from a direction that meant he was getting close to something. Not necessarily land, but something. A change in the water patterns. A change in the air. Something was different. He couldn't explain it scientifically. It was just a feeling. The kind of thing that sailors talk about. A sense of the ocean, an intuition that comes from being on the water long enough. Tim had earned that intuition through suffering, through paying attention, through 3 months of having nothing to do but observe the ocean and understand it. On day 89, he saw a bird, not a seagull or a petrel or any of the other ocean birds he'd seen before. This was a land bird, a booby, if his memory of tropical birds was correct, which meant land was relatively close, not days away, maybe not even hours away, but close. He tried not to get his hopes up. He'd learned that lesson on day 60 when the fishing boat had passed. But something in his chest started beating differently. After 90 days of assuming he might die out here, the possibility that he might not started to feel real again. Bella seemed to sense something too. She was more animated than she'd been in weeks. She was standing at the bow of the boat, looking out toward the horizon with an intensity she hadn't shown in a long time. It was like she knew, like she understood that something was about to change. On the morning of day 90, Tim woke up and knew something was different. The water looked different. The air smelled different. Even though he was still surrounded by ocean in every direction, even though he couldn't see land, he understood that something had shifted. He checked his makeshift navigation notes. Based on his calculations using dead reckoning and celestial navigation, all done by hand with no electronic aids, he estimated that he was getting close to shipping lanes, places where actual ships passed, places where there was a chance, however small, of being found. He spent the day doing things to make himself and the boat more visible. He cleaned up the deck as much as he could. He positioned the boat to catch the maximum sunlight. He prepared his flare gun. He made sure he had everything ready, just in case. That evening, he was on deck watching the sunset when he noticed something on the horizon. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him again, but then he looked more carefully. Was that a ship? Was that actually a vessel on the horizon? It was getting dark. The sun was dropping below the horizon. If there was a ship out there, the window for being seen was closing. Tim grabbed his flare gun. He didn't want to waste flares. He'd been so careful about rationing them. But this looked different than the fishing boat on day 60. This looked like it might be closer. This looked like it might actually see him. He fired a flare into the darkening sky. The red glow burst above the ocean. He fired another one, and another one. The ship on the horizon didn't change course immediately, but Tim kept watching. He kept his eyes locked on it. Please, he found himself thinking, please see me. Please. And then, slowly, deliberately, the ship changed its course. It was turning. It was coming toward him. It was actually coming toward him. Tim's legs almost gave out. He had to sit down on the deck. Bella was barking, sensing the change in his energy, sensing that something significant was happening. After 90 days, after 3 months of absolute uncertainty, after countless moments where he thought he might die alone on this boat, someone had seen him. The ship continued to approach. It was a Mexican tuna fishing vessel, a working boat that was part of a commercial fleet. The crew on deck had spotted his flares. They'd seen his boat. They'd understood that someone needed help. As the ship got closer, Tim realized he was crying again. But these weren't tears of despair. These were tears of relief. These were tears of gratitude. These were tears of understanding that somehow, against all the odds, he was going to make it. He called Bella to him and held her tight. "We made it, girl," he said. "We actually made it." The Mexican fishing vessel pulled up alongside his damaged catamaran. The crew on deck was looking down at Tim with a mixture of shock and concern. They were seeing a man who weighed maybe 40 kilos less than he had 3 months ago. They were seeing someone with a wild beard, skin that was burned and peeling, eyes that looked like they'd seen things no human should have to see. They were seeing someone who had been pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance. But they were also seeing someone who was alive. Someone who, along with his dog, had managed to survive 90 days in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with almost nothing. One of the crew members called down, asking if Tim needed help, if he was okay, if anyone else was on the boat. Tim tried to answer, but his voice came out rough from disuse. He'd been talking to Bella for so long that speaking to actual humans felt strange. "I'm okay," he managed to get out. "I'm alive. And my dog is alive. We're both alive." They lowered a rope and began the process of getting Tim and Bella off the catamaran. Tim made sure Bella went first. She was hoisted up in a bag that the crew had prepared, and Tim watched as she disappeared over the rail of the fishing vessel into the hands of actual human beings. People who worked for a fishing company. People who were surprised to find a boat with a man and a dog drifting in the middle of the ocean. People who were now responsible for getting him and Bella to safety. When Tim was finally pulled aboard, the first thing he did was ask about Bella. The crew led him to where they'd secured her, and he spent a few minutes just holding her, not saying anything, just holding her and understanding that they'd made it. They were off the boat. They were with other people. They were alive. The ship's doctor examined them both. He checked Tim's vitals with a kind of professional concern that suggested he wasn't sure if this man should even be alive. "Your vital signs are surprisingly stable," the doctor said, "which is remarkable given what you've clearly been through." Tim was severely dehydrated. He was malnourished to a dangerous degree. His immune system was compromised. He had scurvy, vitamin C deficiency that had caused his teeth to loosen. He had sun damage over most of his body. He'd lost roughly 50 pounds, more than 40% of his body weight. He had calluses and sores and issues with several of his joints from the constant movement and strain. But he was alive. Bella was alive. And that was all that mattered. The ship was heading back toward port in Manzanillo, Mexico. They were maybe 3 or 4 days away from harbor. Tim spent that time eating whatever food they offered him. He couldn't eat a lot at once. His stomach had shrunk to the point where large meals made him feel sick. But he ate frequently. Real food. Cooked food. Food that had been prepared by other humans. Food that tasted like something other than raw fish. He spent time with Bella, making sure she was okay. She had her own recovery to deal with. She was thin and exhausted and traumatized by the entire experience. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. He also spent time thinking about what he was going to do when they reached port. He knew he was going to have to give statements. There would be officials who wanted to know what happened. There would be news. There would be attention. He'd gone from being a relatively unknown guy sailing across the ocean to being a survival story. A man who'd survived 90 days adrift with nothing but a dog and his determination to keep going. On the 4th day, the ship pulled into the port of Manzanillo. There were people waiting, officials, news crews, people who'd heard about the rescue and wanted to interview the guy who'd been rescued with his dog after 3 months at sea. It was surreal in a way that Tim found difficult to process. After 3 months of silence and solitude, suddenly there were dozens of people. He gave a press conference. He talked about what had happened. He talked about the storm that destroyed his electronics. He talked about the 90 days of survival. He talked about Bella. He talked about how the two of them had kept each other sane. When the reporters asked him if he thought he was going to die out there, Tim was honest. "Yeah," he said. "There were moments where I thought I wasn't going to make it. But I had Bella, and I couldn't let her down. So I kept going." One reporter asked him the question that Tim had been dreading. They asked about his plans. Were he and Bella going back to Australia together? Was he happy to be rescued? What was next for him? Tim's face changed. He became somber. He'd known this question was coming, but it didn't make it any easier to answer. "Bella saved my life," he said. "Out there, when I wanted to give up, when I couldn't see the point anymore, she was there. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. But Australia has very strict quarantine laws. For a dog coming from outside the country, the quarantine period is long, and the process is complicated. Bella can't come back to Australia with me." The reporter pressed. "What does that mean? Where will Bella go?" Tim took a moment. He was clearly struggling with the answer. "One of the crew members who rescued us, he's volunteered to adopt her, to take her home with him, to give her a good life. And I'm grateful for that. Because even though I can't keep her with me, I know she'll be okay. I know she'll have a home. And that's what matters." The reporter asked if Tim was sad about it, if it felt wrong to leave Bella behind. "Of course it's sad," Tim said, his voice thick with emotion. "Bella and I went through something together that I don't think most people could understand. We survived something that most people would have given up on. But she gave me everything she had out there, and the least I can do is make sure that she has a good life, even if that life doesn't include me." Over the next few days, as Tim recovered in a hospital and prepared for the journey back to Australia, he spent as much time with Bella as he could. He took her for walks around the port town of Manzanillo. He fed her proper food to help her recover from the ordeal. He told her goodbye over and over again, understanding that this was the end of their story together. The crew member who was going to adopt her, his name was Carlos, seemed like a good guy. He was kind to Bella. He understood what she'd been through. He promised Tim that he would take good care of her. And Tim had to believe him, because the alternative was unthinkable. On the day Tim was set to fly back to Australia, he spent his last hours with Bella. He held her. He cried. He thanked her. He told her that she was the bravest dog he'd ever met. He told her that she'd saved his life. He told her that he would never forget her. And then, Carlos took her, and Tim watched as his companion of 90 days was led away. The dog that had kept him sane when everything was falling apart. The stray that he'd picked up off the street a few hours before setting sail. The one creature who had believed in him absolutely, without question, without hesitation, for 90 days in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. When Tim finally boarded the plane to fly back to Australia, he sat by the window and thought about everything that had happened. He thought about day 1, when everything was perfect. He thought about day 14, when everything fell apart. He thought about the long, dark days in the middle, where he wasn't sure if he would make it. He thought about day 90, when rescue finally came. He thought about Bella, about how a random stray dog picked up off the street because nobody else wanted her had turned out to be the most important being in his world when everything else was taken from him. When he landed in Australia and stepped off the plane, Tim Shaddock was a different person than the one who had left. He was thinner, he was weathered. He was scarred by the experience in ways both visible and invisible. But he was also transformed. He'd looked directly into the face of the ocean's indifference. He'd stared down his own mortality. He'd survived when everything said he shouldn't have survived. And through it all, he'd had Bella. The story of Tim Shaddock and his dog Bella became a global story. News outlets around the world picked it up. People were fascinated by the idea that a man and a stray dog had managed to survive 90 days in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But the story meant something deeper than just survival. It meant something about companionship, about the way love and loyalty can sustain us through the absolute darkest moments of our lives. Experts in survival have analyzed what Tim did right. Survival expert Mike Tipton spoke about it. Without Bella, Tipton suggested Tim's psychological state might have deteriorated to the point of being beyond recovery. Having a living creature to care for, having a reason to keep going beyond just personal survival, that could very well have been the difference between life and death. Tim's catamaran, the Aloha Toa, was eventually recovered. The damage from the storm was significant, but the boat itself had held together. The fishing company that had rescued Tim donated the boat to maritime authorities in Mexico, and it became a reminder of what one person and one dog had managed to accomplish in the vastness of the ocean. But the real story wasn't about the boat or the survival statistics or the distance traveled. The real story was about two broken creatures who found each other by chance, or maybe by fate, depending on what you believe, and who refused to give up on each other when everything in the world said they should. Tim has said that he still loves the ocean, that he still wants to sail, that the experience hasn't broken his spirit or his desire for adventure. But it's also changed him. It's made him appreciate things in a way that most people will never understand. It's made him understand that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about having something worth living for. When people ask him if he would do it again, sail across the ocean, face that risk, Tim says yes. But he also says he wouldn't do it the same way. He wouldn't sail into the season without proper backup. He wouldn't ignore weather warnings. He wouldn't take unnecessary risks. But more importantly, he says that if he did sail again, and if he did face another crisis, he hopes he would have something or someone worth fighting for. Because in the end, that's what it comes down to. That's what survival really means. It's not about being tough. It's not about being smart. It's about having a reason to keep going when everything inside you wants to quit. For Tim, that reason was a stray dog named Bella, who he picked up off the street a few hours before setting sail on an impossible journey. A dog who had no business being on that boat. A dog who wasn't trained for ocean sailing or survival situations. A dog who was just another abandoned animal in another port town until Tim decided to take her with him. And somehow, in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, with no help on the horizon and no way to call for rescue, those two broken creatures found exactly what they needed in each other. 90 days, one boat, two survivors, and a bond that transcended species and circumstances and the absolute cruelty of the ocean itself. That's the story of Tim Shaddock and his dog Bella. That's what it means to refuse to give up. That's what survival looks like when you have someone worth surviving for. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you were in Tim's position, if everything was taken from you and you were facing the absolute worst circumstances imaginable, would you have Bella's faith? Would you have her loyalty? Would you have someone or something that you would keep fighting for no matter how impossible things seemed? Because that's what separated Tim and Bella from the ocean. That's what kept them alive for 90 days when they should have died. It wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was the simple, profound power of two creatures refusing to abandon each other. And if you want to know what happens next, if you want to hear more stories about impossible survival and the bonds that keep us human, hit subscribe. Because there are more stories like this out there. Stories about people who faced the absolute worst and came out the other side. Stories about resilience and hope and the power of having something worth fighting for. Drop a comment below and tell me, if you were stranded, what would you fight for? What would keep you going? Because I'm genuinely curious about what drives people. What makes someone keep fighting when everything says they should give up?